guys. I am here with a good friend of mine from back when I was in high school. This is Ben Lair, and he is a missionary in Poland. So Ben was my youth pastor's brother, or is, I guess, still they're still brothers. And the mission trips that I went on were out to visit Ben and his family. So Ben, if you want to kind of introduce yourself, add to that, tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Okay. So I grew up in Saginaw, Michigan, and from a pretty early age, kind of thought that I would want to be in gospel ministry, maybe a pastor, maybe a missionary, maybe in camp work or something. I didn't have any real specific um, plan, but I met a Polish young man while I was in college, and God started working my heart thinking about missions and what other countries need church planting. And so, to make a pretty long story short, we moved here in 2001 to church plant. And so we've now been here about 20 years, getting close to 20 years. And the Lord has allowed us to be a part of 3 church plants. So the first 2 are established churches doing pretty well. And the third one is still just a tiny group of people. Maybe there's about 10 of us.
Yeah. Are all those churches in Siedlce?
So we were in Krakow for about 3.5 years, planted a
Okay.
church there and left it and moved to this town in 2004. And so there's a church in Siedlce that I'm the pastor of, and we have about 40 members. And then there's a church plant about 25 miles south from here in a town called Wuków, and that's the little one where we just have about 10 folks.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say we kind of talked this earlier, but Siedlce is where we did most of our missions trip time. And then really, so for me, just kind of background on that. So the first time we went with our entire youth group, and then the second trip it was me and just Sean. I don't know if you remember Sean,
I
but
do.
so we went together. So it was just the 2 of us. Our parents put us on a plane, sent us over, and then Ben picked us up, thankfully. But it was a really awesome time for me. One of the best memories I think I have of being in just mission trips in high school. Something I always go back to, and just I think we were you had to stay with families in your church, and we hung out with them, got to know them. The one memory I always think about is it was just us. It was us and the 2 boys we were staying with, and we were out in the backyard playing soccer. And what was his name? Is it Milush? Is that?
There, so I think you stayed with a family where the teenage boy was Wojtek, and I
Yeah,
think Sean stayed with a family where the teenage boy was Michał.
Mihao. Yeah, so we were at Mihao's house, and his parents were gone. I think they went to a wedding or something. So we were out in the backyard playing soccer, and the memory that always sticks in my mind is we were playing, and Mihao kicked the ball, and they had this big glass window, and when he kicked it, it just soars through the air. They didn't have the nets; they just had the post for goals, and it just goes in the air and just goes straight into the glass window, breaking the window. And I remember because it just, I don't know if you ever had that experience of it just being like in super slow motion. Just seeing it, like everyone's just like time just stops, your head just turns, you just see it break, and then we look back at Mihao and he just drops to the ground, like covering his head. And I don't think his parents killed him or anything, but that was probably I think that's something that's gonna stick with me, just the relationships that we built. But that story specifically, I don't think I've ever experienced anything else going in slow motion quite like
Yeah,
that happened.
yeah. Michał has moved away from Siedlce. He lives up in northern Poland. He's doing pretty well. And I actually just went up and visited him like 3 weeks ago.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, cool. So you're still connected. Yeah. So that's something. Those memories kind of stick with you through. Even how far 6-hour time difference and 16 years later.
Yeah,
But well, I guess it was probably more like 14, 15,
yeah,
15.
yeah.
But yeah, so great times. And then the other memory I had is, I don't know if you remember, but I think we went out like on a farm, and you were like, I'll give you like 5 zloty to eat this garlic. And I was like, sure. And I popped it in, and it was like this like super like hot and spicy garlic, and I made a complete fool of myself. So those are just some of the things that I remember from way back when. But like I said, for me, those were super formative experiences. And I think just seeing, you just being out on the mission field and experiencing that firsthand for such a small period of time has been really cool. And then even just the emails that you've been sending out and kind of keeping up with that to some degree has been really cool to see you guys progressing. And like we were talking about, your daughters that are once in college, once in high school, and then a middle schooler. And then where my kids were probably the age that your kids were when, so just how time
Yeah,
flies, it's wild.
yeah,
But through all of that, we've been talking about God's protection over the past couple of weeks in our youth group, and just dealing with some students who experience that on a personal level. So I was wondering if you could just kind of speak to your experience with God's protection, maybe on the mission field or just wherever you've seen it kind of pop up in your ministry, in your life. We'll kind of go from there.
sure. Um, yeah, I don't know how unique being a missionary is to a person experiencing God's protection. I think that the amount of difficulties we've had in our life here is probably similar to the amount of difficulties that most anyone has. Um, but um, but I guess um, when you go to the mission field, when you leave the country that you grew up in, and like, I think we were about 21 when we moved from the States to Poland. And, you grow up in the States for 21 years and you speak the language really well and you understand the culture really well. And then you go into something that you just don't know what to expect. You just don't know what's waiting for you over there. And that was exactly our case. I think the internet technically existed when we moved to Poland, but it wasn't something that you used on a regular basis. We weren't able to do all kinds of research about Poland. We talked to some people that had previously lived in Poland, and they gave us lots of information. So we thought we knew quite a few things, but then when we got here, lots of what we'd been told just wasn't exactly the way things were. So we just went into this great, really unknown. We were told how we could get visas to stay in the country. None of that information was valid. We kind of came here almost illegally and then had to figure out quickly what to do, how to be able to stay in the country and be legal. Um, and and when I look back on it now, those first few years when we just didn't know anything about how to function in this country, we couldn't speak the language to people. We couldn't do grocery shopping. Um, Back then, there weren't big supermarkets. There were little tiny grocery shops, and most of the products were behind the counter. So there was a lady working there, and you had to ask her, "Can you give me, some flour, and can you give me some cheese, and can you give me salami?" But when you can't speak, we didn't know how to say the amount of flour we would like, or the amount of potatoes, or it was really hard to function. And the truth is, in those first few months, I lost like 30 pounds or something, just because you can't. We moved to a new country that we didn't know what to do, didn't know how to live there, didn't know how to communicate to people, didn't know how to cook or do really basic things in life. And you look back on it now, many years later, and you just see that God brought you through. God protected you. God did it. We didn't do it. The one kind of a little bit bizarre story I have about a little bit of a difficult situation that we were in that God protected us in. So the way that we got visas our first year in Poland or so was we left the country every 89 days. So any American is allowed to be in Poland for 89 days without any visa, and that's called a tourist visa. So if you get pulled over by the police and they say, "Where's your visa for being in the country?" you can show them your passport and show them that you've come into the country sometime in the last 89 days. And as long as you have a stamp on your passport that you've come in the last 89 days, well, then that's allowed. So an American can live in Poland for 90 days without a visa. But obviously, the intention for that isn't that you live here for 10 years and every 89 days just leave the country and then come back. But that's what we were doing at the
Yeah.
beginning. So we lived in Krakow, and there's a big train station, and trains were easy to get on. So we would just hop on a train ride the train across the border into like Slovakia or Czech Republic or Hungary, uh, walk around a city for a day, and then bring the next train back to Krakow. That's what we did every third month for a while. So we got on a train one night. It was a kind of a train that had like beds that you could lay down in. So I laid down on a bed on one side of kind of an aisle, and my wife and our infant daughter laid on a bed on the other side of the aisle. And we had like a door in our compartment, and we locked it with like a couple locks, like a chain lock and a bolt lock. And we all went to sleep. There was another lady in our compartment with us. And in the middle of the night, you could hear like the bolt was getting shaken a little bit, and that chain was getting shaken. And these guys broke into our compartment to steal stuff. Middle of the night, come in with a big knife and a flashlight, and because there's the flashlight, you can see it flashing off the knife. And I woke up last. So my wife wakes up and doesn't say anything, just like looks right at the guy, like staring at him, like, I see you, so you can't steal anything because I see you. And that didn't really deter him. He still kept kind of coming in and looking for something to steal. And then the other lady woke up, and she started screaming when she woke up, which woke me up. So then I wake up to this guy in our compartment with a knife. And by that time, when she's screaming, he kind of goes out. And as he goes out in the hallway, the guys that he had robbed previously were waiting there, and they grabbed hold of him. And the train's moving. I mean, we're going pretty fast down the tracks. I don't know, 50 miles an hour or something. And they physically threw him from the train. So he got thrown from the train while we're trucking along there in southern Poland. So that's my only kind of bizarre.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that one before, and it's probably good that you didn't like share that when you came, like when we were getting ready to go on the missions trip. I don't know that our parents would have let us go, let alone, like me and Sean just getting on the next year and just, flying over by ourselves. But wow, that is incredible. Yeah, so I think, you're probably right. I think we kind of can get this idea of like missionaries are like completely different people, but like they're still like dealing with humans in a different culture. And while there are hardships at the same time, like you said, you probably like the hardships aren't going to be like any crazier necessarily. You're not always going to have those stories of a guy coming into your compartment with a knife. I've never had that happen, but you're going to have them. It's just going to look different. So God's protection is still going to be there regardless. But I guess kind of follow-up question, when you were you were headed over to Poland, like you said, and we're just kind of struggling at the beginning. Did it take time for you to understand, hey, God is protecting us? Like, was it like a certain amount of time afterwards, or do you feel like during those circumstances, during those events that you saw, hey, God, I think there's a sense that we know God is good, we know God is there, but it's like, we try to say, okay, well, this is God working, or this, maybe this is just happenstance. Do you feel like, this was definitely God's protection? And could you tell during the time, or was it after the fact, do you think?
Yeah, so for me, I guess I'm not exactly sure how it works for other people, but for me, yeah, it wasn't like there was a period of time that I felt like we were on our own, and then after some time, my eyes were open and I could see that God had been helping us all along. It wasn't at all like that, but really like a real roller coaster of just up and down and up and down and up and down, of days when that even if things are really bad, that God is with you. God has allowed these difficulties right now, and you're just really quite trusting him, even though things are pretty difficult. And then just within a day or the next couple days, you're all worried and taking all those burdens on yourself and putting them all on your shoulders again, and not really trusting God, and just feeling like, how am I going to deal with this? I've got this problem, and I've also got this problem, and I've also got this financial problem, all at once. So yeah, for me anyway, my days of having problems, even some pretty big problems in life, and them not driving me to some sort of a depression, but me being able to trust God, and then within some hours or maybe days later, with the same amount of problems, um, putting them all on my own shoulders and on myself, and forgetting to remind myself of important truths, that nothing has changed here. God is allowing these problems for some purposes of His, and I'm to just trust Him. It just, in my life, yeah, I mean, as embarrassing as that sounds, just looks like a roller coaster.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's like a human experience. I think, I think there's times in my own life so we fostered and we adopted our girls, and we, in a different sense, like there were times where it would be like going great, and all of a sudden something happens, and then you're just like all the time knowing, like we were just saying, hey God, thank you for allowing this to happen. Well, then, the volatility of the foster system, it's like that changes, within the next 24 hours, and you go back to that. And I think that's exactly right, though, is we do tend to forget rather quickly the things that God has done for us. And because I think part of it, just kind of bringing it back to the protection aspect, I think when we think of God's protection, we think of it in a specific way of keeping, like the protection is always keeping from harm or keeping away, and that's not necessarily what God's protection is. In our previous Devo, we looked at Psalm 23, and though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, that's not like the author there is saying this is going to happen. We are going to experience these, and I think in our comfort, we want to stay away from those things, and we don't fully understand why it has to be this way. Why do we have to experience those things? And so I think that's why we forget God's protection and God's goodness when we're in it. And I think it takes an intentionality of understanding our perspective and changing our perspective when we want to put it back on our shoulders.
Yeah.
Kind of, I think the important thing, because I mean, God is there. God was there for us through everything that we experienced. But
Yeah, I just read through the Old Testament in the last couple months. I thought I would try to read 10 chapters a day and get through the Old Testament kind of quickly, and see what that sort of fast reading through the Old Testament would open my eyes to. And one of the things that really struck me was Jeremiah. I don't know how much I've noticed him before, how much I've thought about him before, but he was obviously chosen by God to be a prophet and live for the Lord, and was honoring to God. But when you look at his life, it's just disastrous. He just goes through all kinds of trouble. And maybe it's complicated why exactly that was, but it certainly wasn't because God had forgotten him, or God wasn't taking care of him, or it certainly wasn't because of any sin on Jeremiah's fault, but just because God had said through the prophets to Israel for a long time before that if you don't turn from your sin, I'm going to bring Babylon in and they're going to take over Israel. Turn from your sin. And Israel didn't. And then Jeremiah was one of those guys alive during those days when God then brings in Babylon and they take over Israel. It wasn't his fault. It was just he was one of the righteous ones living during that time. So all of God's promises are true to Jeremiah, just like they are to some of us who live lives that don't have those sorts of huge problems in them. So his blessing on us and his protection of his children and all of his promises that are valid for his children, that doesn't mean that you're never going to have any problems, or he's gonna work in such a way that none of the big dangers of life ever affect your family. They did affect Jeremiah, and he wrote, Lamentations, which are very sad, but he wept and went through difficulties like a Christian should. So with hope that these trials might last a whole 80 years, but that's even just a drop in the bucket of eternity. And God hasn't turned his back on me just because we're going through these difficulties. We'll suffer, We know that, but we've got to be able to suffer with hope.
Yeah, that hope I think is definitely that's almost God's protection in of itself, right? The fact that we have that hope, the fact that we know our suffering isn't going to be in vain, that there is eternity, to, like you just said, a drop in the buck, 80 years, that's a long time to us, what's it been, 5 weeks for us, in our current world, and we're all tired of that. And so 80 years, we don't even think about that, but we have hope that, and God, and almost in of itself, that's a form of God's protection, at least in my
Right.
mind.
Yep. Right.
So it's not a physical, like, hey, you're not gonna break a bone, or you're not gonna experience that, whatever. But that hope, God's like, I'm not leaving you alone to deal with it. I am with you always. Going back to Psalm 23.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. I appreciate your insight and all this. So just kind of twisting the conversation, just kind of more like current state of affairs. I don't want to like dwell on it too much, but I guess just to help us gain some perspective, because I think one of the things that we get stuck in is we only see it from my worldview. Like, I just see my front porch. So just kind of throwing it out to you, how are you guys dealing with our current world out in Poland? Does it, I mean, from my experience, it wasn't all that, Europe like was similar, had its differences, but I mean, it's not like it's a third world country, I mean, now you have the conveniences, but what does it look like for you out in Poland?
Yeah. So I don't know what the percentage is of Polish people that own a home, but there aren't a lot of Polish people that own homes. Most Polish people live in like a high-rise apartment complex sort of situation. That's what we live in, an apartment. In our building, there's 64 apartments, and in our neighborhood, there's maybe like 30 buildings about the size of ours. So big apartment building, and then about 30 feet, and then another big apartment building, and 30 feet, another big apartment building. And we're not allowed to leave the apartment. You can leave only for necessities. So if you're on your way to work, on your way home from work, or on your way to a grocery store or returning from a grocery store, there can't be meetings of more than 2 people. And there can be religious meetings, a church service, for 5 people or less.
Okay.
So yeah, so if you have a backyard, you need to rejoice, because those of us who don't are kind of wishing we had a backyard. We have a little balcony right here in front of me. You can go hang out on the balcony, but that's it.
Are you allowed
So
to go out for like exercise? Like, if you're like, hey, I want to go for a run, or
no,
it's overrated?
no running. Yeah, no exercise. I mean, do it in your house or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the high schooler Maya, she's doing all her school from the house here. Everything's online. The 6th grader Elena, she's doing everything from the house. My wife teaches English full time, so she's teaching all her English lessons from the house, and I'm trying to pastor from the house. So right now, I don't know if you can hear, Elena, the 6th grader, she has a violin lesson, and she's doing it through the internet, and she's 2 rooms away, so I can hear her, but maybe you guys can't quite hear.
No, we're not picking her up, but
But that's the sort of situation we're living in. Is the apartment isn't quite big enough for everyone who has a lesson online to not hear the other person who's in the other
yeah.
room who has their lesson online. So yep, so that's been life for us. As a pastor, I do have the right, the freedom to be able to go visit someone from the congregation that needs prayer or needs a visit. So if I would get pulled over by the police, and that's happening when people go out for a walk, the police will stop them and say, "Where are you going?" And if they're not going to a grocery store or to work, they could get in trouble. And you can get pulled over, and they can ask where you're going. So as long as I'm going to visit a parishioner, going to visit someone from church, then I'm allowed to do that.
Do you have some sort of like documentation or something that you're just like, you hand them?
I do. Yeah, I have a card that says I'm clergy. Yep.
Nice. So, are you? I mean, you're probably staying busy and just trying to keep everybody off of each other in your apartment. But have you like are you gonna try to pick up any new skills being quarantined? Do you have any like aspirations of, like newfound, I don't know, savant of something?
No new hobbies. I really do like to read, and I really do have like a long list of books that I have hoped to get to and haven't got to. And so now is a time when I'm kind of catching up on that.
Good.
I started yesterday and I'm about halfway through. Andy Naselli has a book called Conscience, and I bought it maybe 2 years ago and started it yesterday, and it's great. I highly recommend it. Go buy it on Amazon if Amazon still functions.
There you go. I don't know if you can get paid for those plugs, but if this gets picked up, he'll definitely make sure there. So really, this isn't really for anyone else's edification except for mine, but it's my conversation, so I'm going to do what I want.
Okay.
So I have 2 daughters, and you have 2 daughters currently in the home. Oh, by the way, so Michaela, right? She's in college. Is she in the
Yep.
States or she?
Yeah. She's at Bethlehem in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Okay, so what is she doing? Did they?
So the school is, officially closed down. All their classes are online to the end of the semester. And so most of the students then just returned back to their parents and are doing those classes, online from their folks. She's not allowed to return to Poland. There's
Right.
no flight coming back. So she's there in the apartment that she's renting.
Okay.
She did have 4 roommates at the beginning. It's down to just her and 1 roommate right now. So yeah, she's feeling pretty isolated and far from home. But in general, she's doing fine.
Okay. Yeah, I meant to ask that sooner before we kind of got into shenanigans. But so for me, what are some tips for raising daughters? So I have the 2, and they're younger, right? They're 3 and 2, and they play pretty well. But do you have any sage wisdom on handling daughters?
No, I don't think so. Since I have no sons, I've had 3 daughters. I think you lose a bit of a perspective on how you would raise boys differently than girls, because all I've raised is girls.
Yeah.
So no, I don't know.
Oh, that's no help. This is the only purpose of this call, man. You dropped.
Sorry.
No, I do find that them being 2 and 3, it's almost like you're raising boys. On certain things, there's no distinction right now. It's they're like I don't know, they're just as crass maybe as boys will be sometimes.
Yeah.
And so it's but they're kind of getting into the whole dress up stage, and they're really good about being sweet in public. So everybody watching be no, not Carly, not Kenley, but they're definitely in the comfort of their own home. They let it all out. But,
Fun.
Yeah. So then last question, is there a soap a soap scent that you've really grown accustomed to, using, since we have to wash our hands all the time?
No. Great question.
Yeah, I think so. You gotta be observant of your soap. I don't feel like soap gets.
I should. So we have in the house both the kind of squirt soap. I think at all of our sinks now, we have 3 sinks. There's not a bar of soap, but you squirt the soap in your hand. And at 2 of them, it's more of a liquid, and at 1 of them, it's a sort of foam.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? You guys have those in the sink? So I tend to head toward the foam one. I like that.
Yeah. It's more fun to play with, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So is there maybe you don't have in your own, but is there a specific scent that you would lean to? Just
no,
clean?
No, I don't think I.
Something to contemplate. I've asked this question a couple of times, and I've had 2 people that I interviewed, sisters, and they both jumped in, and they're yeah, this is what I like, but everybody else. So you're in good company. Most people don't really think about it either. So that's just one that I like to ask. But anyways.
Excellent interview question.
Yeah. So kind of put you on your heels there. But thank you so much for joining us. I said, I think part of this was letting our students see kind of people that were influential in my life. I know we didn't really spend a ton of time together, but the times we did, I think they were meaningful and impactful, and even just by association of Casey, which maybe we'll get him on soon. Just kind of the connection we had there was really great for me, and just kind of the memories there, and establishing that these are the people that influenced me in my life. So hopefully they'll see that and enjoy that aspect. But thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Come visit anytime you want.
Definitely. So I think when we've taken mission trips, like everything's been like to like the Dominican and like Spanish speaking countries. But like I definitely think that since we have your connection in Poland, I feel like people would be down and get some kielbasa.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah, we'll try to make it happen.